The most expensive sentence in a lot of people's careers is not "I quit." It is "Sure, I can handle that." That sentence sounds helpful, mature, team-oriented. It sounds like the kind of thing responsible adults say before they get promoted, respected, and eventually rewarded for being the person who always comes through. And sometimes that happens. A lot of the time, though, something much less exciting happens. You become useful in exactly the wrong way. You become the person who fixes things, covers gaps, absorbs extra work, makes chaos look manageable, trains new people, takes the late meeting, stays calm when other people get weird, and keeps the machine running without forcing anyone above you to feel too much pain. From the outside, that looks like career strength. From the inside, it often turns into a very strange financial trap. Because companies love reliable people, they just do not always love paying them in proportion to the value they quietly remove from everyone else's day. So the person who thought they were building security ends up building dependency instead. They become too useful to ignore, but weirdly easy to underpay. Their workload rises faster than their compensation. Their stress rises faster than their leverage. Their identity gets stronger while their position stays softer than it should. That is what this video is about. Nick here, and today I want to talk about one of the least obvious money problems in adult life, which is what happens when being dependable becomes your entire career strategy. I want to talk about why some of the most capable people in the room are not actually getting ahead the way they should, how reliability often gets mistaken for a compensation plan, and why being good at your job can quietly become one of the most expensive financial identities a person can build. The lie reliable people absorb early. Most competent people get trained into this trap young. Not officially. No one sits you down and says, "Here's how to spend the next decade being valuable enough to overuse and agreeable enough to underpay." It happens more politely than that. You get praised for being dependable. You get rewarded for being low drama. You learn that being easy to work with makes adults happy. Teachers like it. Managers like it. Clients like it. You become the person who figures things out, stays late if necessary, and does not create friction. This works beautifully at the beginning. It gets you trust. It gets you responsibility. It gets you labeled as someone who can handle more. The problem is that most people assume those things naturally turn into money. Sometimes they do. A lot of the time, they turn into more responsibility, more expectations, and more emotional labor, while your actual compensation moves at the polite, sleepy pace of HR-approved annual adjustments. That is the gap. Reliable people keep confusing increased usefulness with increased market value. They are not the same thing. Usefulness inside one company can be enormous and still be priced lazily if you never force the issue. Why this feels safer than it is? This trap survives because it feels stable. That is what makes it dangerous. The good employee thinks, if I keep proving myself, they'll notice. If I keep being the one they can count on, it will lead somewhere. If I become indispensable, I'll be secure. That last word is where the whole thing gets slippery. Indispensable does not always mean protected. Sometimes it just means loaded. It means more gets handed to you because saying no would disrupt the system. It means you become part of the company's emotional infrastructure. You are the person they rely on because you will not create a scene, because you care, because you take the job seriously, because you still believe effort and reward are in a healthier relationship than they often are. This feels safer than making noise. Safer than negotiating. Safer than interviewing elsewhere. Safer than testing your market value. Safer than risking the reputation of being difficult. But a lot of the time, what feels safe is just familiar. And familiar underpayment can last for years. The compounding cost of being the person who always says yes. Let's do some math. Imagine two people start at the same company making $70,000. Same age. Same rough competence. Same role. Person A becomes the good employee in the classic way. They are always available. They solve problems. They take on extra work. They keep everyone calm. They become the manager's favorite kind of person, high output, low noise. Person B is also competent, but they manage their usefulness differently. They document wins. They push for compensation conversations. They are willing to say no sometimes. They test the market every couple of years. They do not assume internal appreciation automatically converts into money. Now let's say person A gets standard annual raises of 3%. After 5 years, they are making around $81,000. Person B gets the same annual raises for a while, but also negotiates one internal jump and one external move, producing two larger increases. After 5 years, they might be making $95,000 or even $102,000. That is a gap of roughly $14,000 to $21,000 a year, every year. And the frustrating part is that person A may actually have done more work over that 5-year stretch. That is what makes this trap so psychologically ugly. They are not underpaid because they are lazy. They are not underpaid because they are careless. They are underpaid because they kept converting effort into internal dependence instead of converting value into external leverage. That is a very expensive mistake to make with your 20s, your 30s, or honestly any part of your life. What companies actually reward? Now let's say the quiet part out loud. Companies do not automatically reward effort. They reward what they are forced to price. That is a colder sentence than people want to hear, but it explains a huge amount. If you keep solving problems without creating any compensation pressure, a lot of organizations will simply treat your extra output as a beautiful free upgrade to the current arrangement. Why would they not? From their point of view, the system works. The work gets done. The fires get handled. The deadlines get met. The difficult people get buffered. The reliable employee keeps absorbing strain without demanding the company restructure the deal. That is not personal. It is economic. Employers are not always asking, who deserves more? Often they are asking, what can we keep getting at the current price? If your strategy is be excellent and hope the system notices, you are relying on gratitude in a place governed mostly by incentives. That is not a strong negotiating position. The emotional trap of being proud of overfunctioning. There is another layer to this, and it is uncomfortable. A lot of reliable people are not just trapped financially. They are emotionally attached to the identity that traps them. They like being the one who can handle it. They like being needed. They like being trusted. They like the quiet superiority of being the competent adult in a room full of people who seem to have lost the thread. That identity can become addictive, because even when it is not paying properly, it still pays in self-worth. It gives you proof that you are serious, capable, mature, valuable. The problem is that emotional compensation can distract people from financial undercompensation for a very long time. You keep telling yourself, at least they trust me. At least I'm respected. At least I'm the one they go to. At least I know I matter here. Maybe. But are they paying you like you matter there? That is the question reliable people avoid for years, because the answer is often much uglier than the identity feels. Why overwork gets mistaken for career progress. This is one of the most common confusions in white-collar life. People assume that because their role has become harder, more complex, and more essential, their career must be progressing. Not necessarily. Sometimes your job is getting bigger while your compensation logic stays exactly where it was. This happens all the time. You start managing problems without the title. You train people without the title. You own outcomes without the title. You handle client stress, operational breakdowns, scheduling chaos, and extra communication without the title. In other words, you start doing promotion-shaped labor inside a salary that never really got the memo. This feels like progress because your days are heavier. But heavier is not always higher. A lot of people are not climbing. They are just carrying more. That distinction matters, because extra effort without structured compensation is not a growth plan. It is a generosity habit being harvested by an institution. The market value problem nobody wants to test. One of the biggest money mistakes good employees make is assuming their current employer is the most accurate source of their value. That is almost never true. Your current employer is one data point, and often a biased one. They know your habits. They know your temperament. They know what you tolerate. They know you care. They know you will probably stretch. They know the emotional relationship you have with being reliable. External markets do not know any of that. They just see skills, experience, outcomes, and fit. That is why testing the market matters so much. Not because everyone should constantly job hop like a caffeinated mercenary with no emotional attachments, but because without an external price signal, a lot of people spend years inside compensation systems that quietly drift away from reality. They think they are being rewarded. They are often just being retained. Those are not the same thing. A retention raise can still leave you dramatically underpriced relative to what your work is worth elsewhere. How this affects wealth far beyond the paycheck. The obvious damage here is salary. The less obvious damage is everything salary touches. If you are underpaid by even $12,000 a year for 6 or 7 years, That is already serious money. But now extend it. Less income means smaller retirement contributions, weaker employer match benefit in absolute dollars, less room for taxable investing, slower emergency fund growth, higher sensitivity to rent increases, more dependence on each paycheck, and lower optionality when life gets weird. Invest an extra $12,000 a year for 15 years at 8%, and you are looking at roughly $350,000. That is the kind of number that changes how breakable your life feels. So when someone stays in the good employee trap too long, they are not just losing income. They are losing compounding years on the income they never demanded properly in the first place. That is why this matters so much. This is not workplace philosophy. This is life math. The way this spills into spending. There is also a nasty secondary effect. People who are underpaid relative to their value often start compensating themselves emotionally through spending. They are tired. They feel unseen. They feel overloaded. They feel like they are carrying more than the title or salary reflects. So they start finding relief elsewhere. Better dinners, convenient spending, small luxuries, a trip, a nicer apartment, something that says, "At least I get this." That is completely human. It is also dangerous, because now the underpayment problem gets paired with recovery spending. The job does not pay enough relative to the strain, and the strain creates spending patterns that weaken finances further. Now the person is not just under-earning. They are under-earning inside a lifestyle that keeps trying to soothe the emotional cost of being underpriced. That loop can run for a long time if no one interrupts it. The person who gets ahead is often not the most loyal one. This is another thing people do not love hearing. Career upside often goes not to the most loyal person, but to the person who understands how to turn performance into leverage. That does not mean becoming fake, selfish, or impossible. It means understanding that work is not just about contribution. It is also about positioning. The person who gets ahead is often the one who names their value clearly, asks for what the role has become, refuses to let extra labor become invisible, tracks outcomes, takes interviews seriously, is willing to leave a system that keeps getting a discount on them. The reliable person often waits too long because they believe the quality of their work should speak for itself. Sometimes it does. A lot of the time, it just whispers politely while the louder, more strategic person gets the number. How to know if you are in this trap? A few clues. If your workload has expanded much faster than your pay, that is a clue. If people constantly rely on you but compensation conversations still feel vague, delayed, or oddly soft, that is a clue. If you are the stable center of your team but you have not tested your market value in years, that is a clue. If your identity at work is built around being low maintenance, highly capable, and easy to lean on, that is a clue. If you secretly know that the company would be in real pain if you left, but your salary does not reflect anything close to that, that is definitely a clue. Again, none of this means you are weak. It means you may have built a career identity that creates more internal comfort than external leverage. Those are very different things. What actually fixes it? Not rage quitting and starting a podcast about boundaries. Usually the fix is much more boring than that. First, separate being valuable from being agreeable. Those are not the same skill. Second, start documenting outcomes, not effort. Effort is easy for organizations to praise vaguely. Outcomes are easier to price. Third, stop assuming your current employer is giving you a fair market reading by default. Test the market. Even if you do not want to leave, information is leverage. Fourth, do not let your role evolve quietly for years without forcing the compensation conversation to evolve with it. And fifth, be deeply suspicious of any work identity that makes you feel morally good while keeping you strategically passive. That one matters, because a lot of adults have built entire professional lives around being the good one, and the hidden cost of that identity is astonishing. The part that should stay with you. There is nothing wrong with being reliable. There is nothing wrong with caring about your work, taking pride in competence, or being the person who can be trusted. The problem starts when reliability becomes your only career language. Because organizations are very happy to accept extra stability, extra labor, extra emotional regulation, and extra competence if you keep offering it without changing the terms. That is the good employee trap. You keep thinking you are building security, but sometimes you are just building a stronger cage with better performance reviews. And that cage gets expensive. It costs salary. It costs leverage. It costs years of compounding. It costs energy. It costs options. It costs the version of your life that could have existed if you had learned earlier that being quietly excellent is not the same thing as being properly paid. The goal is not to become reckless or difficult for sport. The goal is to stop donating your highest value professional years to a system that has learned you will keep performing without being forced to pay the full rate. Because they can always count on me is not a compensation strategy. And if that has been your strategy for a while, it may be time to ask a harder question. Who has been benefiting more from your reliability, you or everybody else?